Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. All right, well, it's time to get started. First of all, I'll let you know who I am, instead of just having you think I'm some crazy lady who's just coming here to the microphone. I'm Kathy Russ. I'm the director of the Troy Public Library. I will send you your check. I want to let you know that you have made history this evening. You are a part of a history-making event. Do you want to know why? This is the first time, this is unprecedented in the history of the Troy Public Library, that a library program for adults, teens, or children has been so huge that we had to move it outside the Troy Library. So thank you. I also want to thank you for braving the traffic and the construction, and I'm sure any number of obstacles that you had to brave to get here. If you look around the room, we set up 300 seats. So that tells you, I mean, this is a fabulous turnout, and I really appreciate you coming out. This is a program that does the heart of a librarian good. This is the story, it's a great story about a great book written by a great author, and you really can't do any better than that. So our great author tonight is Steve Luxenberg, and just a little bit about Steve. If you've read the book, and he's going to talk to you about the story, but what you may not know is Steve is the senior editor for the Washington Post. Andy's Ghost was named one of the best books, one of the Washington Post best books of 2009. It was also a Michigan Notable book in 2009. Steve himself has helped several journalists to Pulitzer Prizes, and so you may want to ask him some questions about that. He's here in Detroit doing some research on his second book, so you may want to ask him about that too. I had the pleasure of having dinner with him tonight, and I feel like I've known him all my life. But I want to tell you, when we started cooking up this program, I emailed him and asked him if he'd be willing to come to the Troy Public Library to talk to people about Andy's Ghost. And he said, sure, and he said, I want to do as much as I can to make people happy, and I want to give people what they want. So he is going to be signing books in the back at the end of the program. If you haven't had a chance to enter the drawing, there's a table on the right of the room with some slips that you can fill out if you want to enter a drawing for a copy of the book that Steve is we're going to do the drawing later, or after the talk, excuse me. And Steve's autographed it, so he's donating that to us, which is fantastic. But it's just a real pleasure to spend some time with Steve. I'm glad that you're getting an opportunity to spend time with Steve. If you've enjoyed this discussion tonight and you want to talk more about the book, there is going to be a book discussion at Beaumont Hospital on November 5th. There are some flyers near the on the table where the drawing slips are, and you can register at the Troy Public Library. You can give us a call or go online. So if you're interested in continuing the discussion, we'd love to see you at Beaumont Hospital on November 5th. It's a book discussion group in the evening, so you're more than welcome to attend. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve Luxenberg, who's going to tell us more about Andy's Ghost.
It's really nice to know that I set the record on a crowd. I want you to know this is the second time in a month that I set a record on a crowd. The other one was in Ludington a couple of weeks ago, where they had the chairs set up for 15 people. And they got 50. They told me it was the record. So I said to Kathy's counterpart, the library director of Ludington, I said, I understand I set the record. And she looked at me with a glint in her eye and she said, yes, for an author. So I said, okay, who beat me? And she said, well, who else? The magician. Can't compete with those magicians. So we said we're going to do a drawing. The reason we're going to do a drawing is that I'm telling tales out of school here. The city of Troy doesn't allow any sales of books on the premises. There's something wrong with that. I don't understand what's wrong with that, really, but because I'm the author and I'm my benefit card. So this was my way of sneaking around the rules. I'm not selling this, we're giving it away. But it allows me to tell you that if you do want to buy the book, and know if all of you have the book. There are copies available, autographed at the Barnes & Noble, John R. What's that? All right, stampede. That's because somebody else bought about 50 of them. But I'm not going to talk about that. So I'm going to be led here tonight because Kathy was so worried that the author would show up because of all the construction. What's wrong with Troy? It's fixing everything. It's fixing things around the library, fixing things around the community center. But I'm just going to I understand that the library was in danger of closing. I hope anybody who thought the library wasn't vital to the community could be here tonight and see what the library can do. Let's give the library a hand. The only thing wrong with moving this event to the community center is I don't get to see the library because I didn't realize I would be here rather than in the library. So part of my biography that Kathy didn't tell you is that I live in Baltimore now. I'm from Detroit. I grew up in the northwest corner. I'm going to repeat that. I live in Baltimore. How many of you are Tiger fans? All right, I'm leaving now. I give you my deepest and most insincere apologies for speaking your Tigers. I don't have any divided loyalties anymore. I've lived in Baltimore so long. The other part of my biography that she didn't tell you about is that I also have an extra credit on a TV show. On The Wire. You know The Wire? It's on HBO. All right, season 5, episode 3. Frame 1 to no. So I'm going to reenact for you my scene from The Wire. Ready? It's a newsroom. It's a newsroom. We're all gathered around listening to the editor give us bad news, and here's my role. All right, well, speaking of newsrooms.
DVDs of The Wire can be checked out after.
You know, Kathy, if more people check out season 5 and buy those 5 books, I'm not going to be very happy. Speaking of newsrooms, in newsrooms, one of the ways we tell young reporters the importance of accuracy is we give them a little asterisk, and we tell them that if your mother tells you that she loves you, check it out. Well, I didn't exactly check out if my mother loved me because I know that she did, but I did get to investigate my own mother, which I suppose would be like every reporter's dream. Don't tell that joke, by the way, at a mental health. They want to give you therapy for it. So how many people here have read the book? Wrong question. How many people here have not read the book? What's wrong with you? Well, the problem with giving a talk to a divided audience like this is that we have to catch these laggards up a little bit. So I am going to go beyond the book. You're going to learn lots more about the book. There's really a lot to learn. I don't know if the answer is. But I have to try to mix and match so that we can catch up with people who have not read the book. So we're going to do a little bit of a synopsis. So the way I'm going to do this is to tell you the following. When I was growing up, I knew 3 things about my mom for sure. Her name was Beth. She was an only child, and she always told me to tell the truth. Her name wasn't Beth. She wasn't an only child. And I think, as a good lawyer would say, we've just established the defendant's relationship to the truth. I'm going to give you some dates, because dates help. It's how writers organize their stories. As a friend of mine once said, quoting a famous British writer, if the king dies and then the queen dies, that's chronology. But if the king dies and then the queen dies of a broken heart, well, now you have the beginning of the story. So the reason that's the beginning of the story is because we now want to know, well, why? What happened that caused them to have a broken heart? Where do writers begin their stories? Yesterday I spoke at Open Community College, and there's a lot of students here from Open Community College, and one of the questions I asked in one of my classes was, where do we begin stories? Well, our parents tell us always we begin the story at the beginning. But where do stories begin? They don't really begin at the beginning. They begin with some sort of emotion, or where we choose to remember them beginning. And for me, as those of you who have read the story know, the book begins in 1995. At that moment, my mom, who was a central character in the book, as we already know, she wasn't an only child. So, how many was your only child? Are you sure?
I'm sure.
I just want to check in with you. 1995, my mom is 78 years old. She is still working. She's relatively healthy. She's driving herself down the Lodge Expressway for her job at a small company where she's a bookkeeper. Now, my mom was born in 1917. Annie, Annie's ghost, the title, her secret sister, was born in 1919. Remember these dates, there will be a quiz later. 1917 and 1919, 2 years apart. My mom dies in 1999 at the age of 82. Annie dies in 1972 at the age of 53, when I'm about 20 years old. And I've often racked my brain for what was I doing when Annie died? If Annie was somehow, if it came into my consciousness that something different was going on around my mom, if she was involved in Annie's burial, which she was. Did I notice anything? And the answer is no, I was totally clueless. Probably because I was flirting with the girl on the bus more than I was paying attention to my mom. But I didn't notice anything, but I take comfort in the fact that neither did any of my brothers and sisters. They didn't notice anything going on. So 1972 is when Annie dies. My mom dies in 1999. My dad dies in 1980. Those are kind of some, stories have arcs, and I like to talk about the arc of the story. So think of this story as beginning in 1917 and more or less ending, at least in terms of the characters in the story, in 1999. Now, in 1995, my mom had only one real health problem. She was suffering from emphysema, which is a lung damage, and because of that, she was experiencing some occasions of shortness of breath. And she was ending up in the hospital on Ivy Grand River, Boston Hospital, which is now part of the MOLA system, I learned today, recently acquired. And the hospital was a pretty good one because it was noticing that she was coming in more frequently for these episodes of shortness of breath than you might otherwise expect. So, the hospital did what a good hospital should do, which is to ask the psychiatrist to go and talk with her and just kind of find out where she was. What was she feeling? What was her mood? He's not treating her. He's not giving her medication. He's not giving her talk therapy. He's just asking her some routine questions in an initial meeting. Now, how many of you have gone to the doctor and you get asked routine questions, right? Tell me about your parents, tell me about your family history, having heart disease, cancer, etc. Well, during those series of questions, the psychiatrist asked about my family, my mom's family history, and my mom said, what I now know, because it was written down and I've seen those records many years after these notes were written, what she said was, according to the psychiatrist, I was 4 years old, my sister was 2, when she went off to an institution and I had no idea what happened. Now, I don't actually know what my mom said. I mean, if I'm a doctor and I'm talking to 1,000 patients a year, I'm probably not taking full and complete notes. She might have said her sister's name, but that's not what was in the notes. She might have said something more about what caused her to be in this institution, but that's not in the notes. And remember, he's not treating her for some trauma in her past. He's really taking a routine family history. What neither one of them know is that a social worker on staff knows my family. And so the social worker, curious about my mom's, how she's feeling, reads the notes and reads these sentences. And she calls my sister, who she knew a little bit. And she said, June, your mom around a lot. She told me these elaborate stories about being an only child. Does she have a sister? And my sister, of course, said, no. Why are you asking that question? And then she said, well, because I misread these notes. Now, how many of you are in the healthcare profession? What do you think of what the social worker just did? Was the social worker in trouble? Now, she will tell you, and she has talked about the book publicly, that she had a release, that there was a release that kind of covered this. But whether there was a release or not, I think what happened here was what I would call real life. And she knew my family. It's just like a small town. It's a small community. She picks up the phone. She calls my sister. She doesn't think about whether she's violating confidentiality, and perhaps, as she says, she's not. She could have asked my mom, but you know, she maybe it was better not to ask my mom because maybe she was mistaken about what she understood. She doesn't know what she's triggering here. She doesn't know that 5 years are going to go by and that the secret's going to emerge again in another way. She doesn't know that 10 years later, the son is going to come along and he's going to write a book. I don't know that I'm going to do it either. Now, the son, I call myself the son. It's very important to realize that when I'm doing this reporting, I call it, this research for this book, I am both a son and a journalist at the same time. That is not true in most of my journalistic enterprises. Most of the time, I'm just a journalist. I don't have any personal stake in the story. Well, not only can I avoid the personal stake in this particular story, I don't want to, because I am both of those people. And I'm reacting to the people I'm interviewing, famously David's mother. David, let's just stand up, David. This is my cousin David. David, if you flip back to the index, look up on your almanac, David, comma David. That's the David. So David's mother, whose name is Anna, is my cousin. It's my mom's cousin. You know, when I'm interviewing her, I'm trying to be professional. I'm trying to be dispassionate, but I'm reacting to the portrait that she's painting of my mom, which isn't a very flattering one. And so later on, after our interview, I listen to the tape recording, and I'm furious with myself because I haven't done a very good job. I haven't asked the questions that if I had no stake in the matter, I would have asked. So I had to interview his mom again, and again, and again, and again. How many times did I interview David? I don't know. It was pretty weird by the end of the 8th interview. Because, as you know from reading the book, David's mom has an amazing story of her own, which is the story of surviving the Holocaust by essentially donning her own secret, donning the deception that she was half German, but in fact she was Jewish, and then doing such a good job that she was able to fool the Nazis into believing her, giving her a job at 18 years old, as a translator for the Wehrmacht. I don't think I could do anything at 18 years old, let alone save my own life, but his mom was able to pull off that amazing deception. So in 1995, we learned something about this. Now, you look at me and you say, well, you're an investigative reporter for the Washington Post. Pretty good job. You must have been pretty good at that job. How is it that you never asked your mom any questions about this? Is it like, don't you just ask questions by second nature? And the best thing I can tell you about it is I reconstruct my own behavior and think about that. When you think about something that you did 10 or 15 years ago, and you're trying to remember what you thought at the time so you can understand your own behavior, it's pretty difficult. Because you're not thinking about it that way. You're just reacting. So at the moment when we learned this, I really did believe that what my mom had told the psychiatrist was true. I believed that she had a sister. I believed the sister was 2 years old. I believed my mom was 4 years old. I don't know why I believed it. I mean, she had just revealed herself as having told a lie. And once you are identified as somebody who tells lies, why would you believe that the next version of the story is true? That doesn't make sense, but I did believe it. Let me stop there and say something about my mom. So, my mom was a very kind, loving, and generous person. You would really like her if she were here. In fact, if she were here, she would find a way to tell you within the first 5 minutes of introducing herself that she's an only child. Because that's what she did. I heard her do this many times. Never occurred to me that it was weird. Think about when you meet someone. Do you talk about your siblings in the first 5 to 10 minutes? Not that you're in a sibling convention. No, you talk about your parents, you talk about your own children. You don't get the siblings, I think, until you get to a second meeting with people. But my mom always managed to control the conversation by talking about being a little child in the very first few minutes. Maybe not the first few minutes, but the first 15 or 20 minutes on a new relationship. Well, my mom, so I didn't ask her. I didn't ask her in 1995 because I really did think there was no point. I mean, if you don't know what happened to somebody when you're 4 years old, what was I going to learn? I could risk making my mom unhappy. I mean, after all, let's face it, she didn't tell her children that she had this unnamed sister. She only told the psychiatrist. So I was kind of respecting her privacy as she defined it, not thinking that what she had told us, told the psychiatrist wasn't true. So I thought, well, there's been no point asking her about it. And the other thing was, if you lose your sister at the age of 4, aren't you really an only child? We can give her that benefit of that doubt. She can call herself that. It's not technically true. It seems like it's true. You don't get a chance to know the sister. You don't grow up with the sister. You can't talk about her. You keep calling her the sister because at this moment she didn't have a name. And also, I think that was a factor. It's hard to imagine somebody with no name. I find that very difficult. So that's the best I can do with reconstructing myself in 1995. So my mom dies, and her secret dies with her, at least as far as her children are concerned. But as I write in the second sentence of the book, secrets have a way of working free of their keepers. Secrets don't like staying quiet. So in the year 2000, in the spring of 2000, the cemetery where our grandparents are buried was sending out letters. I don't know how many years they've been doing this, but they did it annually for a while. Sending out letters asking if you wanted to have flowers planted on the graves for the spring. It was a form letter. And at the bottom it listed 3 graves, not 2. In the 3rd grave, now this unnamed sister had a name. Her name was Annie. And I can imagine it being Annie. I can imagine it being Annie. But we still didn't know anything about her. But now my doctoral curiosity has been spurred. I make a phone call to the cemetery. That leads to a burial record, which tells me that the informing party was Northville State Hospital. Now, it turns out that Annie didn't spend much time at Northville. She's no longer open. But now I knew that Annie had been a patient at a psychiatric institution. So I call Lansing, and I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just making phone calls and stumbling around in the dark and trying to figure out something about this, because I'm curious. I landed in the lap of a woman who's quite kind, who works for the Department of Community Mental Health. And I tell her, sort of spluttering, I just learned that I have a relative who was in a state institution, and I'd like to find out something about her. And she said, you and 5,000 other people. Well, of course, that was a made-up number. She plucked that out of the air. She was trying to say, I get dozens of calls a month from somebody just like you who wants to know something about relatives that they just discovered. I talked to some of you before this talk about your own relatives who you discovered you didn't know existed. So she says to me that I can't tell you anything. The state law prohibits me from letting you know anything about this. Well, I can hear in her voice, because reporters are trained to do this, I can hear in her voice that she actually doesn't want to get off the phone. She wants to help me. And my job is to let her help me in a way that she feels comfortable. But I don't know what questions to ask. So I just say something like, well, there's really no point in pursuing a court order, which is what she had told me I would need. If the records don't exist, can you find out whether the records exist for me? This is called stalling. And she said, yes, I can do that. Now, she went on to say, I have on my desk a photograph of two twin sisters. One of them was in a mission institution, the other one was not. And the one who was not wanted to find, she'd lost touch with this other sister. She wanted to find the sister. And I helped her by giving her a social security number. And she did the rest. And then when they got together, they had a reunion. They sent me a photograph of the two of them. And it's on my desk. Isn't that sweet? That's not what I thought. I thought, you just told me you violated the law. How can I get you to violate the law for me? But of course I won't say that. What I say instead is a lot of other questions like the spelling question until we hang up and I give her my fax number, and that's how long ago this is. Fax number. And then 2 weeks later she calls me and she says, I think the records have been destroyed, at least we can't find any of them. And I basically give up because I have a job, it's the year 2000, I'm not writing a book, I'm not thinking about writing a book. But then a week later, without warning or provocation, that's an allusion to the first sentence of the book, without warning or provocation, the fax machine starts whirring, and over the fax machine comes the first 6 pages of Annie's admission to Eloise Hospital in 1940, and the last 6 pages from her discharge at death in 1972. Okay, so I told you there was going to be a quiz. What's wrong with getting records from Annie's admission in 1940 when she was supposedly 2 years old? When was she born? When was she born? 1919. So I'm sitting there looking for the 1921 admission to the hospital through these pages that I have in front of me, and there is no such admission. And it's very clear from the admission records, and even clearer when I get the court records several months later, actually several years later. When I get the court records, that Annie was never admitted to the hospital at the age of 2. She was 21, for those of you who have not read the book. She was 21, my mom was 23. And they had grown up together in a neighborhood where everybody knew Annie. And it was not a secret in the neighborhood around 12 and my grandparents and my mom and Annie grew up. So that benefit of the doubt I just gave to my mom. You're an only child, you only 4 years old, you lose your sister. That went out the window, and now I have a whole other story to think about. Now, I said before that my mom was a very kind, loving, and generous person, and I've also made clear that she had some problems with the truth. And some people will say to me, how do you reconcile the fact that your mom was 2 different people? And I say, how many people here have never told a lie? There's always one in every group. How many people here are proud of every single thing they've ever done in their life? All the people in the community college, yes. You notice I'm not raising my hand. So, all of those who didn't raise their hands, are you 2 different people? We're all complicated. We all have things that we do and say that we wish we could take back. My mom just happens to be a little larger than all of us. Think about how we make decisions. We make decisions today and think about the consequences for 50 years from now? 5 years from now? How about 5 minutes from now? We have a problem, I think, even 5 minutes from now. Well, my mom creates a secret for whatever her reasons, and no, I'm not going to tell all the people who have not read the book what the reasons are. You'll have to read the book. It starts with shame and stigma, yes, but it doesn't stop there. That's just the beginning. She has other reasons. If you decide to create a secret, as my mom did around the age of 25, are you thinking about whether you're going to be saddled with that for your whole life? No, I don't think so. You don't think about what's going to come along when you have your children and when your children grow up. And, children is a very interesting thing because some of you have been children, I think. Yeah, you've been children. Some of you have been parents. You think about how you raise your children. We all decide as parents not to tell our children something because we don't think they're quite old enough to handle it. So what age is that? 7? 10. Then we wait until they're about 15, and then they already know it. And then they're mad at us for the rest of their lives. Because we didn't tell them my grandma was an alcoholic. It really would have been nice to know that, but I didn't understand her behavior or whatever the thing you didn't tell them was. I call this the black hole of childhood. Well, there's some undefined amount of time where we don't tell our children things that we probably ought to prepare the ground for. Well, my mom, in 1995, the story doesn't stop there. The story goes on to a few months later. Her health has deteriorated somewhat. She's not really taking care of herself very well. She's not cleaning her apartment, which is really, really, really strange because she's always been a fastidious housekeeper. She's not eating well. And it looks to me like she's suffering from some sort of depression. And the psychiatrist who she had spoken with earlier has remained part of her care. And so a meeting is held with him, and he suggests that what she needs is a medication that treats depression, but the medication is better monitored in the hospital for somebody who has emphysema than given to somebody at home where there's a slight risk of respiratory arrest. A bigger risk for somebody who has emphysema. So he wants her to come to the hospital on a 2-week stay, and he wants to monitor her and see how she's doing on the medication. She agrees, much to my surprise, because she didn't like psychiatrists and she really didn't like hospitals. But she agrees, which kind of shows you where she was at, that she would think this was a good idea. Now, I should say something about Annie a little bit, for those of you who haven't read the book. So Annie was born with a deformed leg. I can do this for about 4 seconds. I should practice that. I can do it for longer than that. It never straightened out. I gave her braces and crutches at various times in her childhood. She did get around. She did go to school, but she went to school late, at the age of 8. She started school. She had IQ tests that suggested that she was on the cusp of what in those days would have been called retarded. Today would be developmentally disabled. And at the age of 16, because she didn't walk very well, they decided she would be better off if they amputated her leg and gave her a stable platform on which to walk. So that was done, and she received a wooden leg prosthetic. Very difficult in those days to have a wooden leg. Nothing like the more titanium products that you have available today. And my family didn't have much money, so they weren't replacing the leg perhaps as often as possible. The maintenance of the leg, the wooden leg, would require getting rid of the leather that was drying out and giving her new leather that would be supple and attached to her own leg in some way. And today, if you have an amputation, counseling comes along with it. In those days, they didn't think about it that way. So Annie didn't have any counseling when she was deprived of a part of her limb. And there's lots of studies today that say that when you lose a part of your limb beyond the age of about 5, you feel grief for the loss of your own body. So psychological counseling is probably a very important thing, and she didn't have that. Her psychological issues, her mental health issues, didn't begin to show themselves until she was about 17 or 18. And so when she went to Eloise in 1940, my grandmother was the one who made that decision. My grandmother signed the petition. My mom, at best, was an interpreter in that relationship between my grandparents who didn't speak English all that well and the hospitals where Annie was seen. But my mom is not the decision maker here, so remember that as well. So my mom, in 1995, goes into the hospital, and the very next morning, she calls her apartment where I'm staying with my older sister. And she says, Stephen, you have to come take me. I can't stay here. I made a big mistake. You don't understand what it's like for me to be here. Well, I understood. I had been here the previous night when she had been admitted. I saw that they took away her pencils that she used to do her crossword puzzles every day. Because in that setting, until you know how someone's going to use a pencil, it can become a weapon. I had seen the other patients. My mom was by far the healthiest person there. I had seen the other patients who were more or less, there were about 15 of them, and there was some form of dementia, was the common malady for most of the patients. It wasn't a nice place to be. But I don't know what to do. I don't know what the right thing to do is. So I do what any son does in that situation. I stall. You know, I say, well, now I'll be there in a little while. We'll talk it over. We'll see what's going on with you. You know, you're not going to be there very long, just a couple of weeks. But I got there, and my mom is in a panic. And she's essentially, the roles have reversed. I am the parent. She is the child. So she uses all of the tricks that children use to get their way. She's cajoling, she's pleading, she's begging, she's even offering me bribes. And of course, I'm not the only actor in this drama. I mean, there's the psychiatrist, there's the staff, there's nurses, there's my sister. And my sister has warned me on the way over. She's famously blunt. She warns me on the way over, Stephen, she's going to go after you because you're the weak one in this family. And she's right. I think she needs to stay in the hospital. So if you take her home, good luck. I'm leaving. It's not leaving. Now, it sounds like my sister's abandoning, but she was making clear her position, what she thought was the right thing to do. So this was truly the most difficult day of my life, because one, I don't know what I'm doing, and two, I don't know what the right thing to do is, but three, it's really difficult to have your parent, your mom, sink to her knees at one point, hug me around the shins, and say, you don't understand, I have to go home. And I didn't understand. I didn't understand that Annie was supposed to go to Eloise on a temporary commitment. I didn't understand that Eloise was her home for 31 years. I didn't understand that my mom feared that she was becoming her sister. Because I didn't really know that the sister existed. I didn't know the sister's name. She wasn't real to me. I wasn't thinking about her sister. I was thinking about my mom. So that's why I ask you, when you think about the potential damaging nature of secrecy, I mean, there are many, many good secrets in the world. And if you're comfortable with something you're not telling anybody and it's not harming anybody else, God be with you. My mom was not that person. Her secret was a burden to her. She felt guilt-ridden by it. It was a problem that she should have gotten rid of. She should have released it. But she couldn't do it. She couldn't do it at that moment. And in that moment, if you're desperate enough to sink to your knees and hold your son's shins, wouldn't you think that would be the moment to change the game? I mean, to use a sports metaphor, the mom says, you know, I had a sister who was in an institution for 31 years. I would have said, Mom, game over, you win. We're out of here. But she can't bring herself to do it in that moment. And so I ask you, did my mom control her secret, or did her secret control her? That's the message of the book. For me, the book is not a book about secrets only. Sure, a secret stands at the center of it, but this is a book about identity. That's what my view of it was as I was writing it. It's the identity that my mom reinvents for herself. It's the identity that David's mom took on and tried to survive in World War II. It's the identity that my aunt loses. She becomes anonymous, essentially, when she goes to Eloise. She loses her identity. And we try to give her that identity back. I try to give her her identity back in this book. It's my identity. So last night I stopped by a book group here in Troy. Somebody invited me. I don't ask you to invite me to all your book groups. I just happen to have a little time. So I stopped by. And somebody in the book group, as others have done, told me that he was curious about Annie's grave, and so he went to see it at the cemetery at 14th and Gratiot. And he did confirm that what I wrote in the book about the gravestone is true. Boy, that was a relief. I was going to get caught photoshopping. But what he also told me is that in a Jewish cemetery, there's a tradition where you put stones on a grave, on a headstone. There are more stones, apparently, on Annie's grave than on most of the others that are in the cemetery. And there's nobody from my family who's visiting
that great because we all live in this area. That to me is why I want to end this talk. That to me is the message of the book and the legacy of the book. And he doesn't work any better. So thank you very much for listening, and please, please ask questions.
I have the microphone, and we're giving it out all kinds.
You ever worry about losing your mind?
What makes you think you haven't already seen that?
Today.
No, I actually don't worry about it. There's no evidence in my life that I have any more problems than all the rest of us have with my mind. And in Annie's case, I don't know if most psychiatric problems are not genetic. In her case, because there was apparently some sort of birth trauma that led to her deformed leg, I'm not sure that I just don't know. No one knows what her real issues are. But, you know, for all of us who, let's take your question in a different framework. You don't like the question, you have to rephrase it. Which is, should we worry about mental health problems? Well, I was talking to somebody recently, and she said, you know, I've never had any mental health issues in my family. And I said, have you ever been to a counselor? And she said, yes, of course. I said, and the counselor was a therapist? And she said, yes. I said, game over. You have a mental health issue. We have to stop thinking about mental health as losing our minds. We're not losing our minds. It's on a spectrum. I think that many people, we have to make this, you know, I was at a talk in Grand Rapids last week, 2 weeks ago. Lieutenant Governor of Michigan, Lieutenant Governor Calley was speaking. And he said, we have to stop thinking about mental illness as a problem. We have to think about it as a diversity issue. And he has a daughter who's 8 years old who's been diagnosed as autistic. That's a very interesting. Disability is a diversity issue. That's a very interesting way of thinking about it.
There's a point in the book where it appears that Annie has been sexually assaulted. It's a little fuzzy, but it seems that that's the point where she starts going downhill pretty rapidly. And it also seemed to me kind of brush it aside. The two come together so totally. That was such a trauma. I mean, it would be for a young girl. She had no idea what's going on. She's just vaguely attracted to boys. Boom.
My editor asked the same question when she read the manuscript. And we had a long debate about it. She felt that, although it was, I've added some things in response to her questions. I added some things to the manuscript. But the problem was that I couldn't find any police report. I don't think it was reported to the police. It didn't occur at all. I don't have any more details about it. And I felt that I needed to know more than I could provide in the story myself, so I asked a lot of other people about it. And for me, the most important voice on that issue, and I do think it's an important issue, was Sandy Ellison's voice. The therapist who said, it doesn't happen that way. It's not a trigger. That's the Hollywood way of thinking about it. Annie's privacy had been invaded, Annie's space had been invaded ever since she was born. Someone was pulling at her leg ever since she was born. Annie already had psychological issues before the assault, whether the assault occurred or not. I felt that by including that kind of discussion in the book, I was answering your question. I did, though, fear that readers would get to that moment and they would say, oh, aha, she had a sexual assault. I understand why Annie was the way she was. Sandy convinced me that she would have been in need of treatment with or without the sexual assault. So I don't want to brush it aside, I just didn't want to make it into the answer. We'll go to the right side of the aisle.
I have a context question. I grew up with a lot of family secrets, and I always thought that they were our secrets and nobody else had these kind of problems, not him. And I'm just wondering, is there a shift or there's a group represent a shift where people can start to talk about these problems and be more open. Do you see that happening more, or are we still holding things in that we really should be talking about? And I'm just curious on what your comments.
You know, it's hard to know. I don't think it's a formula for all families. And some families do great talking about things, and some families have more difficulty. I think that I'm in favor of talking. Last night, one of the readers in this book group said, one of her favorite passages in the book, I love it when people say that, was when I'm having a conversation with my brother about going forward with the project, and I commented afterwards that at least we're talking about this. We're not mom and Andy. So there's a change from my mother's generation to our generation. I do think that there's a shift. I do think that we're more open as a society. A historian I quoted in the book says that we now live in the confessional age, where everybody wants to tell their secrets on television. I do think children is having an effect on this. But I still think there are secrets. Every generation creates secrets, because secrets are created. I've thought a lot about secrets. Secrets are created because there is a taboo of some sort, or there's a judgment of some sort, and you don't want to be subject to that judgment or that taboo. So what would be an example of that? Well, in the 1980s, when AIDS was first discovered, and it was associated with a number of tough behavior or situations like drug abuse or homosexuality, etc. Revealing that somebody had AIDS in the family didn't just reveal you had a disease, but it revealed something else. We often didn't know what that was because sometimes we didn't know what was the cause of the AIDS. So there were people who told me we hid the fact that one of our family members had AIDS because we didn't want to have the other discussion that came along with that. And that's why I say every generation creates new secrets, because new things occur. On the other hand, we also are still holding tight to the secrets of 100 years ago. I feel very strongly that there's absolutely no reason why family members, not the public, but why family members can't get their records, their family members' past records from 100 years ago. I mean, if Grandma was in Kalamazoo State Hospital, and Grandma has been dead for 100 years, no one's discriminating against her for a job or any of the other harms that come along with being identified as having a mental health issue. Why shouldn't families know, in case it is genetic, or in case scientists learn more and more about the genetic basis for whatever diseases we have, medical or psychiatric? We're going to want to know more about our past, not less. So there happens to be, I didn't know this until a month ago, but there happens to be a bill now, Senate Bill 253, Senator Dave Robertson, who I don't know, has put this bill, and it's not law, it's still pending, that would open up records. He has a number of provisions about how they would be opened. The 25 years is his marker in this bill. You're welcome to look it up online. I don't know that that bill has a chance of passing. I can see why we get a lot of opposition. But you have to ask yourself, when records are kept closed, ask yourself two questions. Who is being benefited, who is being harmed? I would suggest that who is being benefited happens to be the hospitals who don't want to get sued. That's not a good reason. I mean, I'm willing to sign a piece of paper that says, I'm not suing you, please let me look at the records. Now, some people might say, well, Steve, you're just one of these curious journalists. You want to know everything about everybody. Well, first of all, we're talking about families, not about the public. But secondly, it's not just about curiosity. I can show you the email that I got from a woman who has a generation-skipping disease in her family, a medical disease. She has gone through her life until 2 or 3 years ago believing that her father didn't have the disease, and it's his generation that would have it. And therefore, her children, if she would be skipped, her children wouldn't have the disease because her father did not have it. Until she learned the family secret. She said her father wasn't her father. And her biological father, who she finally tracked down after much investigation, in fact was have the disease. We shouldn't have to track these things down. when you go to the doctor and the doctor asks you, what's your family history, it shouldn't be a mystery to you and your healthcare provider.
Just a little comment on what you're saying, is with all the locks that you're putting with privacy with the arguments is becoming probably something that will be down the road an issue as well. You know, and that's, I mean, I totally agree with you that people should know history, especially medical history.
Well, I'm a privacy advocate. I suspect if we took a vote here in the audience, we'd all be privacy advocates to some degree. But I'm not given to quoting German philosophers very often, but Hegel said something along the lines of, the true tragedies of life are not the conflicts between right and wrong. Those are more obvious. It's the conflict between two rights. So yes, we have a right to privacy. And yes, families have a right to know their own history. And we have to work that out, and that's what legislators are for. And I think you're right. I think over the next 10, 20 years, we will begin to work this out because the discoveries will lead us to need the information. It will help people to know. I'm going to move back a little farther here.
What made you pursue Annie so long?
Made you pursue it so long? Don't leave ego out of this. I just thought it was a very important story to tell. Yes, it helped me settle some personal things in my own life. I mean, I remember my mom at the age of 25, that wonderful photograph of her that's near the front of the book, but to remember her as the more sickly, needy person that she was at the end of her life. But that wasn't really my motivation. I just felt that it was a really important story to tell, that people would benefit from learning it, that families could learn that secrets can be damaging and they can be freed from that burden. I'll tell you one story that wraps it up for me, which is that I heard him talk 3 or 4 years ago. One of the people came up with a book under their arm, and she said, I just want you to know how much you helped my family. And of course, I was very eager to hear this. And I said, tell me what happened. And she said, I brought your family to Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. And I said, we have a family secret that we all know we're not talking about. I want you to read this book. And after you read it, I think you'll see that we can talk about this. It's possible to talk about this. She said, last year at Thanksgiving dinner, everybody had read the book. We had that conversation, and our family is much better off today as a result of having that conversation than we were before. So thank you for writing the book. That to me, if I hear no other compliments, that's the one that makes it for me. I'm going to ignore all these people over there. All right. Don't keep that.
Okay, I don't know how to word my question right, so I'm in the process of reading the book now. Okay, I want to know, do you feel like you found all of the answers to your questions, being that you never talked to your mom and don't know exactly why she hid the secret?
Well, I haven't got any trouble with these questions. I think the answer to that is always going to be no. No writer feels like he or she gets all the answers to anything. I got a lot of answers, and I did the best I could. And what I want you to feel at the end of the book, when I start telling you what I really think what went on, is I want you not to agree with me, well, that would be nice. I want you to say, yeah, I can see why he said that. Well, I can see why he said this other thing. What didn't he think of this? That's fine. We're having a conversation through what we call the art of reading. I don't need to be right. I just need to be credible. If that makes any sense. I think if my mom were here, I would have learned a whole lot more, of course. But unfortunately, that's not the way we tell history. I mean, think about it. How many books came out of Lincoln last year? Anybody interview Lincoln? I'd like to be that guy. So we do the best we can with the available information. That's why I sought my mom's friends out Although, as I learned, they also didn't talk all that much about their secrets. So there's kind of understood that we're not going to talk about this. And that's why some of my mom's friends have. That's why I interviewed David's mom so much, because David's mom, which you probably know, you reached that point, and my mom had a discussion in which I get David's mom's perspective on that discussion, even though I don't get my mom's perspective. So yeah, there's a big hole in the story, and I don't interview my mom. And yet, I still think that the book has value. But there's no, I'm not hiding anything there. You know that I have to interview my mom. So you can, I mean, if somebody were to say to me, Steve, as soon as I learned that your mom wasn't a part of this story, she didn't get interviewed, I didn't want to read it. I'd say, you're right, go read it. That's what you're looking for in my mom's reaction. This book is not for you because I can't give you that. That's the best that's how I feel about it. You've already answered it.
It's over here. That's a shame.
Okay, my question was simply, what drove you to keep going? Like, even when you hit, there's so many places in the book where you hit road bumps or you couldn't find information. What drove you to, search out other people that could possibly give you more information? Why didn't you just say, okay, I have,
Why not give up?
yeah, that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, Elena. I tell you, for me, it didn't help in this case to be a journalist because journalists are used to being told no. One of my colleagues at the Washington Post once said to me, she turned to me and she said, no is just the beginning of the conversation. If you already know that you're going to run into roadblocks, it's a lot easier to run into them. I don't feel like I ever reach the end. I always feel like if I just can think about how to get around that, I'll figure out the best way forward. But so to me, it's kind of like a puzzle. It's kind of like a contest, me against the facts, me against the roadblocks. It makes it a lot easier to do that if you don't. I very rarely was frustrated in this book. I know it seems like I must have been really frustrated, but I expected most of those roadblocks. The only time I got frustrated is when someone like, I don't even know what I actually wrote about her. There was one person who told me what my motivations were in writing the book and told me I wanted to write just another cuckoo's nest. Meaning I was going to portray a mental hospital as being a terribly abusive place. And she wasn't going to talk to me because she knew that's what I was really after. Well, I wasn't after that, and then I got frustrated because now she's not talking to me not because of some law or some philosophy that she has, but because she thinks she understands who I am as a person. That's frustrating. I eventually got her to talk to me though. All right, we're going to go all the way to the back.
So one of the, I'm an inspired writer, which is why I came here, because I like to see people that are successful. And one of the hardest things to do is to push through the emotion. And if you're discovering these big secrets about your family and redefining who they are, how do you push through that? To keep going. Now, how do you not get overwhelmed by the emotion? Where do you find the bravery?
I would never adopt the word brave. I don't think myself. I have a chair. But again, being a journalist means that I have more experiences than most people when keeping emotions out of things. It's kind of frustrating for my wife who thinks that we once went to the art museum in Florence, the famous Uffizi, and she's enthralled and she's emoting all over the place. And she said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, I'm still kind of taking it in." And she said, "Why do you always say that?" A lot of times when I was going through the emotions of this book, I was still taking it in. I wasn't having the emotions that made me think I was having. At other times, though, it's really weird to have a conversation, as I did with Sandy Ellison, who I mentioned before, and she turns the tables on me and she says, "What are you feeling about this?" And I told her why I thought it was an important story. She said, "No, that's what you're thinking. What are you feeling?" And 5 minutes later, I'm in tears. Well, imagine trying to take notes about yourself while you're crying, taking notes about yourself. It's like. So in that case, I didn't take any notes until after I left, and then I sat down and I tried to remember what it was that I was saying. And part of what we know from reading the book is that I'm very meticulous about not recreating things. And so when that happens, you don't recreate it, you just do the best you can, and you don't remember the dialogue, so you don't write the dialogue. I think you're asking an excellent question, though, which is that don't fool yourself. This is art, right? It's not a family story. It's not me venting. I want it to be literature. And if I'm too emotional, it can't be literature. Then it just becomes like a family story. And if you read this book, and some of you I know probably feel this way, you say, "I don't care about your family. Why did you write this book? Who cares?" Well, that's the way you feel, and I failed you as a reader. I hope I don't fail everybody, but I failed you because I want to make this into a universal story. My mom is any mother, any daughter, any sister who is in the situation she finds herself. My aunt is any woman who was sent to Eloise. And there were many, many women and men who were sent to Eloise. I'm any son who discovers I have an unknown relative in a family secret. It's a universal story. If it doesn't read that way to you, then I somehow failed as a writer. You hand to the friend behind you.
Throughout your journey, have you ever seen a picture of your aunt
Can't hear me if I have the microphone. You don't lose my voice. No. I mean, in a word, no. I won't give you a long answer because there will have time for more questions, but I have seen a lot of photographs of my mom that I didn't see when I wrote before I wrote the book, because I've now managed. People, once the book came out, a lot of people wanted to help me. But there was a photograph of Amy taken when she married Eloise, because every patient had a photograph taken. Unfortunately, I never received that particular page, and so I never have seen a photograph of Annie. And these family albums that I referred to, they don't have pictures of Annie. And I did my best in the book to speculate, one, that we probably didn't take pictures of the girl with the deformed leg, and two, that they didn't take that many pictures because there were special occasions or whatever.
Did you ever find out whether it's somebody behind this person?
The question was, did I find out whether my grandparents were indeed first cousins? The answer is they were cousins. That's what the family lore was when I was growing up. David will tell you that they absolutely were first cousins. I think he'll say that. I don't have any reason to distrust my cousin. Why would I? He's an upright, stand-up guy. It's very interesting, though. I was amazed to find out that half of the states in the United States prohibit first cousins from marrying, and the other half do not. Well, either it's a problem or it isn't. Why do we have such a division? Well, of course, it honors one of the things that makes the United States unique as a country in the world, which is that we have all these states that have their own ideas about how to run governments. But it also means that the science of that is disputed, and I basically think it was really a problem that all 50 states would have a prohibition. And since they don't, I think it's basically not a problem. I didn't want to walk very far.
Thank you. When I met you May 22nd at the Rust Belt Market, I asked you a question, and I thought after it was a little bit dumb. But your mother had a great amount of guilt, which she didn't have enough time in her life to shed, to open up to you. And when I drove home, it always happens when I leave the scene in a place, I get one of these great thoughts. And this is just more of a comment than a question. You gave your aunt an identity that she didn't have while she lived. You gave her a life. And the stones that are on her grave marker, which is a traditional thing of having visited someone and leave a stone, you gave her an identity, you gave her a life, and her name means something.
Thank you for that. You had one great thought on the way home. I had none on the way home. Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Actually, my question is kind of to David. Is your mother still alive? Okay. I just wanted to say, that part of the book, I was so impressed by her. What a woman. I'm really.
Okay, I'm going to stop, and the next question, we're going to do the drawing, not stop the program, but just change up things a little bit. Okay, so get ready for all 5 of you.
You mentioned that some people came forward after the book was published. So did you get any additional information that maybe you would like to share with us that might give us a little more insight into the topic? And also, I heard mention of a second book. Would you be willing to give us a hint?
So I've met various people. So I guess the 2 most prominent I'll tell you about is that there's a woman named Pearl who's in her late 80s who knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody. The great thing about Pearl is that she had known about the book before she actually decided to read it, but she had decided the first time around not to read it because she saw it in the library, Annie's Ghost, and the librarian said, "You really ought to read that book, it's interesting." And she said, "I'm really not interested in the supernatural." And according to her, the librarian didn't know enough about the book to tell her it wasn't about the ghost. Secondly, when she did finally pick it up and she read it, she started to say, "Wait a minute, I know this, I know that, I know those people, I know that place." Well, it turned out that she lived on the same street as my grandparents when she was 7 years old, and she and Annie were playmates when Annie was 14. She said that because of Annie's intellectual deficits, they were about the same intellectual age. She certainly didn't think anything strange of Annie, and vice versa. Well, we don't know about that. Maybe Annie did think she was a little strange. My question to her as she described their play activity was, wait a minute, what about Annie's crutch with Grace? And she said, "I don't remember her having trouble getting around." Now, I don't know what they were playing. I doubt that they were having a vigorous game of tennis. But she said she had quite a lot of fun with her, but unfortunately her family moved away about 2 months after this began. And she said, we played when we were outside. We didn't seek each other out. So when I left, that was really the end of our relationship. But she described Annie as very talkative and bubbly. And that goes along with the second story, which is after one of my talks, actually was in West Bloomfield, right before I started, a woman came up to me. She lived quite a distance away, like 45 miles away, maybe past Brighton somewhere. And she said to me, "I wanted to tell you that I met your aunt when I was 12 years old. And I was in Eloise, not as a patient. She was the daughter of a psychiatrist, 2 psychiatrists, actually. Mom and Dad were both psychiatrists. And my sisters and I were at a Catholic school. After school, we'd come back. There was a soda fountain on campus, and every day we would go to the soda fountain. And during this 1-2 month period, Annie was there every day. And we got to be quite friendly with her. Now, I stopped and said, "How did you know it was the same person?" I said, "There are probably a lot of people whose names are Ann or Annie or you were 12 years old, and she said, well, you know, I thought the same thing. I realized reading the book, I wanted her to be the same person. But I called my sister, who lives out of state, I had not read the book. What was wrong with her, I don't know. And she said, you mean the patient with a wooden leg? All right, I probably think there are a lot of patients with wooden legs who are also named Annie, so I think it was probably the same person. And she too used almost the same language in saying that Annie was quite talkative and bubbly. Now, I think this was in the early 50s-ish, maybe late 50s, but before Annie had been taking medication for a while. There's no medication that would have benefited Annie. Well, there was no medication at all that would have benefited Annie, but none before 1955 and later. So I know that by the end of her life, the medication had some side effects, and she had a faux tremor that comes along with one of the side effects of Haldol or Thorazine. Anyway, after the talk ended, she came up to me and she said, I came here tonight because I wanted you to know that in my 12-year-old eyes, Annie really seemed happy. Now, of course, I had no idea that Annie was really happy. Let's assume she was happy at that moment. But I thought it was really important that the two of us had that conversation. That she thought that I needed to know that, and that she took made the effort to come 45 miles to tell me that story. So that's the two most important things I've learned. So I would have put, Pearl's story, I definitely would have put it in the book. She said some of the things that were interesting too, but, you know, it doesn't change anything really, but it does add. More questions?
Next book.
I was hoping someone would forget. Writers are famously superstitious. They're like the jinx things. So let me just say that it's not about me. It's not about my family. Thank you, John. Those of you who know the memoir genre, I don't have any dysfunctional family story to tell you about how I wrote a book. I'm going to cut my family to blow apart and not writing a book about that. Instead, I've chosen to write a story of the 19th century about one of the most famous Supreme Court cases in history, which is all about race and how we ended up with legal segregation. And I'm telling the story of people who got caught up in that case. And it's really a story of America between 1850 and 1900. And I hope that you'll like it. It has three main characters and their wives and their lives, and I think it's a fascinating story. I just need to find somebody who can tell it. Okay.
I would just like to say that you are a powerful speaker. And when I met you out there in the hallway before the thing, I would look at my watch, it was 5:52, and my watch stopped at 5:52.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. Simple question. The two families moved to the ravines in the 60s. Where was that?
You guys are going to make me, I don't remember everything I did in my life. The ravines is a subdivision that is in Southfield. And it's on 9 Mile. I don't remember, it's not on 9 Mile, it's behind 9 Mile. And I don't remember the cross street. Does anybody else know? No, I think it's close to these. Kathy, why don't we come up and do the drawing? Because I don't want anybody who has to go and miss out on their chance. This isn't one of those raffles we get a call a day later. You're not here, you don't win. Okay, spells, potions, and freaking But pull the thing out. It's a tree. Does it also like make the book go poof? Why am I doing this? Everyone's going to hate me. All right, Price Waterhouse has confirmed that this is an honest drawing. I think I might have signed a book already for this person, based on his name. Where is Betty Ball? There you are. Maybe I'll come up here because I'm going to sign it for you. I'm not going to do it now because I want to take a few more questions. But don't leave.
I won't.
Did you at any time want to, or finding all these things after your mom was dead, did you at some point get angry at your mother? Did you ever feel angry? And if you had to do it over again, would you have questioned?
Excellent questions. I don't get asked that question very often. It's an original question, but I did get asked it once before by an interviewer for a newspaper. And she read the book and she said, "Why aren't you angry at your mother? You don't seem angry." When she asked the question, I'm not surprised by it now, but I was surprised by it then because it was the first time it was asked. Because it never occurred to me to be angry at my mother. The reason I kind of decided, or I thought about it, was that it seems to me that we get angry at people because of something we feel that they've done that wrongs us, that hurts us. My mom didn't create the secret to hurt me. She created it before I was born. So to turn the story, I thought, turn the story into something where I'm angry or to express that emotion, it never occurred to me to be angry. But if I did get angry, I think I would have been being self-indulgent a little bit, like it's not about me, so why am I getting angry about it? But it doesn't mean that I don't think it doesn't mean that I think that my mom made the right choice, or that I don't disagree with her. I think she made a bad choice for her. It hurt her. And I also think that she would have been better off had she released her secret. So that makes me dismayed at the choice that she made, but I'm not angry at her. And if you've read the book, you know that this is a book of understanding and not a book of judgment. I'm not saying in judgment, and I don't really like to do that all that much. Sometimes I do. Would I ask my mom if I had to do it all over again? Well, the easy answer is yes. I think a better answer is, I think I could have the conversation with my mom in a way that would have helped her. Because now that I know that I think she essentially feared being judged, I think that knowing that, I could immediately make her feel comfortable that she was not being judged. I don't think I could have made her feel that way in 1995 because I wouldn't have had the knowledge that I have now, although I still don't think I would have been judgmental. So yes, I think I could have that conversation. I think it would be successful, and I'm sorry that I didn't have a chance to have it. On the other hand, if I had it, it probably would be a book. Because, my mom would still be alive, I know everything that she told me, I would find it so fascinating, I would go to that. Yeah.
So I have a 9-year-old boy who's cognitively impaired. And when he was first born, realized there was something wrong with him. We went to the various geneticists, neurologists, and weren't able to find a reason to diagnose him. And so I called my uncle because I remembered that I had a cousin who had been given up when she was about 2 years old. And it was a very painful conversation to have. I wanted to talk to him about, did they ever have a diagnosis? I was trying to find if it might be something genetic. And he explained to me that she had some form of cerebral palsy, and that when she was like 2 or 3 years old, was not sleeping through the night, constantly banging her head against the walls. They were banging on the bone, had a hard time caring for her. And the doctors, there wasn't at that time, and this is the 70s, there wasn't partial respite care like we're provided now, or anything in the state of partial. It was either you gave up your child in the state, or you kept your child. There was no in between at the time the state was there. And so the doctors really encouraged them to give her up, that it would be for her benefit, that it was much better off. So my question to you is, because I think it's so easy to look back and judge previous generations, it's so easy, and I like the way that you didn't just say, well, Eloise is all over the place, you said, oh my gosh, you know, it was a whole society, a whole town, you know, obviously they had a social, right? So my question to you is, did you find anything to show that the doctors were also really pushing for Annie to be moved to Eloise institution as that's for benefit? And also just talking to psychiatrists, did you kind of understand more of that generational philosophy of it was better?
Well, first of all, I thank you for sharing that story. It's can't be easy to sit up and talk about yourself, your child, so I really appreciate you telling us that as part of your question. Your question opens up an hour worth of conversation. I'm sorry I won't be able to do more than that. What I want to say is that the law in 1940, when Annie went to Eloise, was very different than the law today. In 1940, it was that the state of Michigan owed care and treatment to its defectives. Unfortunately, was the word of the law. When you owe care and treatment, then you don't provide care and treatment, you open yourself up to lawsuits and complaints, etc. It was very much, I don't use this word judgmentally, it was very much a paternal system or a maternal system. That is, the state is going to take care of your child. And that's why there was a lot of pushing people with the institutions, because the state thought it knew best, and the patient didn't have very many rights. They didn't think about it as the patient not having rights. Instead, we know better what to do. The petition, if I can display on the screen, the petition that my grandmother signed that sent Annie to Eloise, you'd see something very interesting. First of all, it's a form, which is no problem with that. Of course, you have to have forms. There's left about 5 lines for the description of the behaviors that are causing someone to say that Annie is allegedly insane. Same for me as very. The first word of this description, signed by my grandmother, so it's my grandmother's petition, is patient imagines herself, etc., etc. Second sentence, patient, third sentence, patient. If you were to send it, I'm not going to pick on you, I'm sorry, but if you were to write out for us, or for a hospital, or for a system, what you see in your son, I suspect you would not write the first word as patient. You would write my son, or his name, or he. Patient is the word used by medical community. So you can see that my grandmother was already in the arms of the medical community, and they were making a lot of the choices for her. I don't say that to suggest that Annie was railroaded into the institution. Only that, to use the same metaphor, the train had already left the station, and my grandmother was as much of a passenger on that locomotive as Annie was. Today, as you already outlined, many things are different. And not only do patients have many more rights, but we've also, one of the known but untalked about, and not talked about as much as I think it ought to be, consequences of the deinstitutionalization process in the 1970s was to push more of the responsibility for care on families. That may be appropriate, it may be even the best for the person who's being cared for and for the family, but it puts a tremendous amount of pressure on families who don't have expertise, when they have a child who has needs and things like that. So that's why the organization called the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, came into existence. It's a family support organization. It's not a patient support organization. There already was an organization that favored patients. We're always going to be grappling with this, I think. I think if we're in the same community center that still exists 50 years from now, some other author is talking about both of these same issues, they're going to be looking back at what we did today, and they're going to be asking themselves and scratching their heads the same questions about why did they do that? Why didn't they do this? You know, every generation has to find its own way based upon the past generation's mistakes. That's the only way you can make progress, it seems to me. So it's not surprising that we would look back at Eloise and say, well, that's not the right way to do it. although there are some things I wish we still did, I'm not saying I do. We can say, I think we shouldn't have abandoned that. Like, I understand why we abandoned most of it. At the same time, you know, we can't get smug about the past. We can't say, well, you know, we would never do a lobotomy today, but maybe we do something else that isn't so kinder or generous. The real question, I think, is, you know, what's the best? You said that, does your son have some form of cerebral palsy? He says cognitive dissonance. You know, I think the most important thing I've learned, one of the great gifts that I've had in doing this book, and being chosen, the book being chosen as a great Michigan read, is the ability to go around the state and have conversations like this one. I've had so many amazing conversations. I'll tell you about one of them. So I was in Traverse City. There's a group there called Front Street Writers. It's sponsored by a best-selling author who lives in Traverse City. And there's an opera house there that hosts national operas, and part of the gig is to come there and do your talk, but then go to talk to the Front Street Writers group, which is 25 high school kids every year who are aspiring writers and they apply, and they get chosen, and they come together once a week. When I was there, one of 25 was the sharpest question, the best questions I got. The most interesting conversation was with a young woman who was in a wheelchair, whose head was slightly crooked at an angle, and who had difficulty speaking. I had to listen hard to understand the questions. I learned later that she has a form of cerebral palsy. But there was nothing wrong with her questions. She was just, you could have had the session just the two of us. The other 24 could have gone home. They weren't all that, they weren't all that into it, I don't think. But the last question that she asked was, she said, when you look at me, do you see your anger? Well, think about that. It was brave. Not a brave, that's brave. That's good. Well, I knew that what she wanted was a real answer. So I wasn't going to sit there and construct one in my mind to be politically correct. So immediately I just answered it impulsively almost. I said, no, recall, I knew her name at this point. I do not see my aunt. My aunt didn't have a wheelchair. My aunt didn't have a slight crook in her neck. My aunt didn't have a speech impediment, as far as I know. I don't see you as being like. And I said, let me ask you a question. When you see all of us looking at you, all of us who are not physically disabled, do you think that we all look at you and all other disabled people as being the same? And of course she said yes. And that's mostly what people who have some apparent difference, that's what they want, is to not be regarded as being different. Or to quote the Lieutenant Governor, disability is a diversity issue. You have to see disabled people as being part of the great spectrum and not segregate them as they were in Eloise. That's the problem with large asylums. They become the other. You put them aside, you put them apart, and we think of them as being something other than the rest of us. And that's not helping the raise society. Okay, Kathy, how are we doing here? Okay. Anybody who needs to leave, of course. I'll talk to you later.
Maybe make a tower of these clothes.
Question was, why did I do Annie's ghosts? Good question. They're just facts they want in the book. I'd like to tell you that how it came from my great inspiration on my wonderful computer, but in fact it was suggested to me by my agent's associate. His suggestion was that it should be Annie's ghost singular. I didn't like that, in part because he thought it up. So I tried to figure out what I didn't like about it, and what I didn't like was the idea that if I named it Annie's ghost, you would think that I was saying that Annie was haunting my mother. Once you read it, that would be the obvious interpretation. I don't think of the story as being about something that simple. I think that Annie represents all of the ghosts, all of the things that haunt all of us about the mental health system, about families. But by adding an S, I would make it seem that we have lots of things to think about, lots of ghosts to think about. I thought it was a good title until the first time I was interviewed on the radio, when I had to actually say it out loud with the microphone, and I sounded like a snake. Annie's ghosts. And I thought to myself in that moment, I should have named it Annie's ghost singular and forgotten about all that other stuff. Okay, somebody in front of you had a question, yes.
A question that we've asked a couple of times in the course of student, I'm teaching the book at Community College, thank you, it's lovely. And what you just said about othering, and you talked about Tilly and her involvement with Annie's intake into Eloise. And what a couple of my students have brought up and what I've been wondering about, where is Hyman in all this? Why, to what extent do you think their poverty and their Jewishness and their otherness influenced him to stay kind of out of that, because we never hear good about Hyman being involved in any of the treatment or intake.
You know, David knows Hyman, my grandfather, better than I do. I spent, I think, more time with him. He used to come over, my grandparents used to go over to David's house for Friday night dinner. So he had a better memory of him, I think, than I did. I did know Hyman, my grandfather. He died when I was 12. But he was a distant, unhappy character in my view. I don't know if you felt the same way.
I say something for one moment. Usually when I see what Andy's possibly very far back. The question is really a good one, in that I look at Stephen in light of his grandfather. And he was a real quiet, unhappy man, right? Didn't say much, and no emotion. And I look at the evolution of what you have become relative to him. And I marvel that the difference is amazing. And he would have been amazing. But he never said anything. So we don't have to help you know. Well, he was very unhappy. He was really unhappy. So he was too, until he was engaging someone. You know, she's a very warm person. And I just could sit there. I showed you pictures of him, you know, in my house. He would sit there by himself. That's the way it was. So,
you know, to answer your question and your students' questions, I struggled with that because I don't think he was involved. I think he was apart from the decision making. He doesn't sign the petition. My grandmother does. I don't think he was totally absent, but the records don't reflect his involvement. So it was hard to put him into the narrative of the story without that. And that's why I described him the way I did in the book, where I told you how I felt about him. And you could write this book without the chapter on his passage from Europe to America, but I put it in there because I wanted you to see what he was like when he came, and what struggles he had, what obstacles were in his way. I think my grandmother was the one who was left with the responsibility. I think my grandmother thought she was doing the best for both of her children. Remember, she's a mom of 2 daughters. The system and her own instinct tells her that one of her daughters needs treatment, if not hospitalization. And the other daughter will benefit from that as well, because it will make it a happier family. And remember, we don't make decisions for a lifetime when we make them. There's no way to know that when Annie goes into Eloise on April 27, 1940, that she's never coming home. You don't know that she's not coming, even if she's there for a year. Eloise released, or paroled, that was the word they used. They paroled their inmates. That's the other word they used. They paroled, not they didn't choose it, the law used it. They paroled their patients. 1/3 of them went home every year. 1/3. of the 5,000. So there's constant turnover. So there's no way to know that Amy's not coming home until, of course, she's not. And as Edna Savage says, the psychiatrist in the book, at some point she becomes a custodial patient. He didn't know her case firsthand, but he knew of the custodial patients. Because that means that we're taking care of them, but we're not really giving them any treatment. I don't think Amy would be in an institution today as she was in 1940. I think she could have been held a job. Amy herself has a perception about herself, as you read. I want to be normal. I know I'm never going to have a normal life. I'd like to get married. I know I won't do that. I mean, these are perceptions that show that she has some insight about the situation that she finds herself in. But you're right. I mean, there's lots of people. I don't know enough about Amy. I mean, if you want to talk about the biggest hole in the book, I can tell you the arc of Annie's life. Yes, talk about Annie's life, but I can't tell you about her days. That's why I do the section where I go to her school. I don't like to read because I think reading is work mostly. But I'm going to read this one part. Try to interest those of you who haven't read the book. So here's my attempt to make, for those of you who are aspiring writers, here's my attempt to make a strength out of a problem. A strength out of a problem. Maybe you would have in Annie's world, I stopped by the Oakland School for Crippled Children on one of my Detroit visits. The school still serves physically handicapped students who make up about 1/3 of its 300-student population. The word crippled, however, disappeared from its name long ago. It is now known as the Oakland Elementary Orthopedic School. On the long drive to the school located on the city's west side, I wonder if there's any purpose to my visit. It's unlikely that Oakland, the equivalent of the junior high school back then, has any yearbooks or records of any 6 years there. As I approach the front door, I have the impulse to turn around and head back to the car. What am I going to say when I enter the main office? Hi, I'm looking for the students who last walked these hallways 65 years ago. The school staff is going to think I've lost my mind. Annie might have been here once, but she's here no longer. How wrong I am. No written record of Annie may exist, but as a kind assistant principal gives me a tour, pointing out the original wooden handrails running the length of every hallway. I have no trouble envisioning her on the way to class, steadying herself as she goes. I can't hear my aunt's voice or ask her any questions, but I can see her phantom figure, the brace on her useless right leg, struggling as best as she can manage with either crutch or handrail, pushing herself forward, a disabled Sisyphus on her unending journey. For those of you who are not quite sure what Sisyphus is, it's the Greek myth of pushing the stone up the hill and having it roll down and you have to keep pushing it up for all the time. So, remember we started this talk by saying that the magician outdrew me and all money. That's kind of like what the magician does. I distract you while I pull the rabbit out of the hat. I go there looking for Annie, but of course I don't find Annie. But instead what I do is I say, but I can see her there, and you can accept or reject my decision to tell the story that way. But that's how you make something out of negative space, if you will, the absence of something. I'm going to take, two questions more.
I just wanted to say.
Okay.
I'm just curious, can you hear me? I'm curious.
Really
I'm curious as to, because today money is everything, taking care of people. Was Eloise actually self-sustaining? It said he had a dairy and a farm. So as far as her grandsons were concerned, they did not have to give any money for her care. Is that right?
Eloise was a public hospital. It was free, therefore. The only way in which it wasn't free is if somehow you were there and you were kind of defrauding the place. There was the provisions of the law for recouping money if you weren't poor and indigent and you could afford it and all that. It's complicated. To answer your question about whether Eloise was self-sustaining, it was and it wasn't. It was self-sustaining, and then you'll get more patients, and it wasn't self-sustaining. It grew enough produce to feed the entire population and sell the excess of each year's harvest at market and keep the profits. They had enough cows to generate 120,000 gallons of milk annually. They had enough pork, enough cow, enough pig. I can give you the totals of something like 3,500, 4,500, and 20,000 pounds a year. All of these things it had. And yet the system was unsustainably expensive. Because if you owe care and treatment, you're going to have an ever larger number of patients. Diagnosis is going to get better. We're going to have more and more patients who are inpatient at the hospital. So, you know, the peak of the number of people in psychiatric institutions as patients boarding there was 1955. The figure was 550,000 people in America were resident in a psychiatric facility. Today, does anybody know the number today? 20 to 40,000. Last time I looked was about 40,000. Okay, the population of the United States in 1955, let's use a little bit of arithmetic, was X. The population now is twice X. If the population of psychiatric patients was 550,000, that's X. 2 times X today is what? Over a million. Over a million, we have 40,000. So, were we wrong in 1940? Are we wrong today? Are we right today? Or were they right in 1940? I mean, the answer is, of course, the law has changed. What's the standard today for somebody to be committed to an institution?
Harm themselves or others.
Danger to yourself or to others. A much different standard and much stricter standard than care and treatment. If the danger to yourself or others is the standard, you're going to have a lot fewer people. But as somebody murmured while we were discussing this, well, there are a lot of people who are homeless, who have a mental illness, who might otherwise have been given care in the 1940s. And there are a lot of people who are in jails who have committed a minor crime or are being charged with minor crime, but what their real problem is that they have a mental health issue, and they have been segregated. In Miami-Dade County, there's a whole floor of people who are in cells who have a mental health problem. That's like the 1840s, to segregate populations in jail. So that's what they're going to be talking about 50 years from now during our era. Why didn't we figure that out? And the answer partly is because we've given patients the rights that they didn't have in Diane's day. And some of those people don't want treatment, and some of them are homeless. You know, the question is, are they making a wise choice? We probably would think those of us who think medication works, but they aren't. But some people think medication don't like the way it makes them feel, and that's where the tension is. That's the 2 rights that Hegel talked about. Okay, you get the last one. Where you go? Somebody over there? You get a question? Okay. All right. This is appropriate that you're asking the last one.
If you would have known about Amy's existence, would you have honestly pursued this?
If you mean that I known about Amy's existence when I was growing up all my life,
If you didn't know that she was alive and instituted, you never really know anything about her, and this is the story as much as you did.
I think the story is improved as a story, as a mystery, by learning about it after my mom dies fully. If I learned, let's say when I'm 20 years old, if I learned that Amy died when I was 20 years old and Amy died when I was 20, if I had learned then about Amy and I had known about her my whole adult life, I don't think I would have. I don't think that's what's interesting about it. What's interesting about it is that my mom was able to keep it until her own death, not to Amy's death. Think about it though. My mother had a number of opportunities which you might think that she would have released a secret. Yeah, she could have, but she chose not to. Part of what maybe you're more of a favorite book than you joked with me in the beginning that you were, because you said you were. Which is fine. He's right. Yeah. But for me, the idea that whatever you think about my mom's judgment, you got to give her the fact that she had stamina. It's really hard to do what she did. Yeah, she could keep a secret. And that's really hard to do that. And so when somebody fights that fiercely to do something that is hard like that, you want to understand what it was that was driving them. And let's face it, a lot of our best stories in novels and literature and nonfiction is all about that driving quest. Somebody who feels extremely strongly about something. Who is that person and what drove them to hold on to that dream, in this case not a dream, that dream, that secret, whatever it is. So I think that makes it a story. If I talk all about this with my mom when she's living, I'd probably never write the book, because I never gathered the momentum that the emergence of the secret, and it's the way it did, working its way free, if that doesn't happen, there's no momentum to my quest. So I think I probably know. Anyway, that's where we're going to stop. Thank you very much for coming.